So tonight we're going to be talking about a 1924 World Jamboree collection. And I phrase it that way because I certainly don't necessarily have every item that was made for the Jamboree to show you tonight. But I recently had a collection come in, and it was some of the memorabilia, but it was a lot of paperwork and history and kind of some of the backstory photos. I have, I don't know how many hundreds of pieces, individual pieces, but you know, you can imagine the size of a big paper box, and I probably have that much paperwork and photos and that kind of material from this jamboree. And so I said, well, this would be great to take some select portions of this and to turn it into a presentation. So my point is that this may not be exhaustive, but I do think that it will at least kind of be a good representation of what was made by the Boy Scouts of America, as well as kind of the history behind the U.S. contingent going to the Jamboree and so on. This is a letter that was sent out, and I didn't want to try to fold it and scan it and mess with it too much. June 30th, 1924. This is just laying out kind of what the contingent is, and this is the information essentially that was sent out to each of the contingent members. And there's some really interesting pieces in here. So first, there were 4 adult leaders. Okay, I kind of already knew that. I knew William C. Wessel was there, and then there's Norman Cole and Ralph Hubbard and James Dixon. The part that I didn't quite know, or at least not maybe in this much detail, is that there was also a troop committee. So the troop committee was 6 members. Now, it was intended that all of these members, and it even said so in the letter, that they would all be at the Jamboree, okay? So, there was Mortimer Schiff, Milton McRae, which you may know he was vice president, Walter W. Head, another vice president. These are essentially big national level scouters who were on this committee. William Murray, George Fisher, who I had not really heard of before. I'm not sure, he'll come up later, but I was not really familiar with him until I started getting into this. And James E. West. And it says that all of these troop committee members will be at the Jamboree in Copenhagen. Well, I believe that most of them went. However, I know for a fact that not all of them did. I think that Schiff and McRae, I'm not sure about Head and Murray, but I know Schiff and McRae went. I think maybe Head and Murray went. I know James E. West did not go, and I'm pretty, I would say very confident. I know that Fisher was at least not there for the whole thing, because there's a telegram between him and the boat, and so I don't think he went. So I don't think Fisher and West went. I'm not sure about Head and Murray. Interesting for anyone who knows, because this is getting into kind of the information the scouts need to know going to the Jamboree. In 1920, and in many of the subsequent years, the United States of America issued passports specifically for the Jamboree kids. They were Jamboree, essentially time period passports that were valid only during whatever dates the Boy Scouts of America requested for the trip there and back. And that's when the passports were good, and they were issued to all the members of the contingent. And they did do that in 1920. So it's odd to me that in here it says that no individual passports will be required. The entire party will travel on one collective passport. Now, I'd never really heard of that, so I don't know anything beyond what it says in the letter. I'm not sure how common that was in the mid-20s or what, but I thought that was interesting. Another thing that I want to go over is the equipment, because this is really different than how you would think about a jamboree today. I'm going to read you some of the letter. So, each scout will be furnished upon arrival in New York with a complete outfit to meet the requirements of the trip and participation in the Jamboree. Except certain personal equipment listed below that the scout should bring with him, no clothing or equipment will be taken from New York except that supplied by the National Council and personal articles listed below. They actually stored the luggage of the scouts, they didn't take their own luggage. Everything was provided essentially to go to the jamboree that they were going to take. So their luggage that they traveled to national headquarters with, which was in New York, all that was stored there until they were back from the jamboree. And then they took that. And we'll get into that at the very end. The kind of important parts, as far as, I mean, all of it's interesting, but, you know, they were supplied the uniforms. The shirts they were supplied were 2 scout shirts woolen, 2 summer shirts, and an athletic shirt. Now, I'm assuming an athletic shirt is essentially like a t-shirt kind of thing. There were 2 neckerchiefs. There was also a complete set insignia, and then in parentheses it says cloth. So that's designating that it was cloth insignia versus pins or medals or that kind of thing. And, you know, I'm assuming it was just, you know, it was matched to the uniforms, and we'll talk about that a little bit. The interesting thing, though, this was really interesting to me. The scout will bring or may secure in New York the following personal equipment. The first thing listed on this letter is badge of highest rank, Life Star or Eagle, and any honor medals. So they could buy it when they got there, I guess, if they didn't have it. But they were expected to bring the patch off a uniform, just the loose patch for their highest rank to go. That doesn't seem really functional. Now remember, there were no 24 Eagle patches yet. It was just the medals. And so I just thought that was kind of interesting. So the other little bit, and this just goes on and on, it's all, of course, interesting, but the cost to go. So the cost for a kid to go, and you're going to start to understand why this was so expensive as we get into this, was $650 in 1924. In today's money, that is over $12,000. So this was not a cheap trip. This was very expensive for these kids to go to the Jamboree. One thing that is a little confusing is that how big was the Jamboree contingent? You'll read on this kind of additional, and this was with this letter, but it was dated a little bit later, but it was one of those things of, it's talking about how many boys are going. I'll tell you, that should be a simple thing to answer. But I want to read you a little bit of this letter because it is quite complicated. So this is telling the executive members of the board of the Boy Scouts that there's a total of 52 boys going to, Bear Mountain to do a training, okay? 5 additional boys are in the process of registration, thus assuring us a full troop of 48 boys and a few extras for emergencies and special events. This result has been accomplished because of the cooperation of many resources. Now, the reason they were doing that was that there was a requirement that the average age of boys in the troop had to be under 16. Okay? And the Jamboree troop, now that's from international, our contingent was not in compliance of that to start with. So what they had to do is essentially they had to come up with 6 additional boys that were young enough that they could then lower the average age of the troop to be less than 16. And it talks about that they had to do some fundraising and essentially come up with the money and find the scouts that they could send that were young enough to make this work. The thing that's confusing is that it sounds like to me an international contingent, the kind of the set size to this Jamboree was supposed to be 48. You'll see it talk about 52, boys going, and then you'll see it talk about, there's another thing, it's an article, well, it's not an article, but it's a pamphlet kind of thing they put out over in Denmark, over in Copenhagen, and it says 65, which is just I don't know where they got 65 from, but that's what was in that. I think that was just incorrect. So it could be that they're counting 48 plus the 4 leaders to be 52. But that doesn't really make sense because it's all about 52 boys. I also have this list of every boy that went to the Jamboree. Now this was put out in July, so this was locked in. And I counted this, and unless I counted it wrong, I tried counting it like 3 times. I counted 50, not 52. So, I'm not quite. The numbers are a little confusing, and in other letters and things, they seem to kind of go back and forth a little bit. But this is supposed to be the list that was sent out of the kind of the official contingent, not including the committee members, that was sent out to the executive board. So it should be fairly accurate. The last part of that letter that was sent out was the boys were supposed to select what patrol they wanted to be in. Okay? And this will come up a little bit later when we talk about some more patrol memorabilia. But the point was supposed to be, what category, especially because of all the competitions they knew that they were going to be going into, was the boy most skilled in. Okay? And so there was forestry, plainsman, canoe, sea scout, pine tree, and hiker. What I believe to have happened is, from everything I've read going through this paperwork, is that when they eventually decided the patrols, they combined canoeing and sea scout. Those got combined into just one patrol, essentially aquatics. Okay? And so that was one. And then they had pine tree, hiker, plainsman, and forestry. So we'll talk about them a little bit later, but I just thought it was interesting that they were essentially trying to choose what patrol they wanted to be in based on their skills, and then they were evaluated at the training camp and on, and that evaluation of the leaders made the final determination of what patrols they would be in. I'm not sure where this photo was. My guess, and I could be totally wrong, I really don't know. There were a lot of photos, and a lot of them don't have anything. I was wondering if this was in New York. I picked it as the first one. I'm not sure of that. And I actually, as I'm looking at it, I bet it's not, because these look like 24 patches, maybe. So this might be over in Europe somewhere. I'm not sure where. I'm not even sure what that flag is supposed to be. I don't know if that's a French flag or what. But this is just a nice photo to kind of get us started. And what I'm going to go through here, I actually have a typed out, it's the brief daily log of the American delegation to the International Scout Jamboree in Copenhagen. And this was done by Robert de Groot, or Groot. I always say de Groot, but it's de Groot. And so to start with, July 12th, which was a Saturday. And I'm going to read, not the whole thing because it's really, really long, but I am going to read some of these entries in his daily log to kind of take you through their journey of the Jamboree. So at 10 a.m., 51 scouts and 51 variations of uniforms, once again, a different number of scouts, but 51, gathered at the national headquarters to take each other's measure, meet Mr. West and officers, and get the preliminary work done. Mr. Wessel, Mr. Cole, or Dr. Cole, Mr. Dixon of the officers were there, but Mr. Hubbard had gone directly to Tuxedo from the West. At luncheon, Mr. West spoke of the plans and purposes of scouting and their families. Buses took the crowd to the Hudson River Day Line Pier and from Bear Mountain Landing to Kanawaki camps. Quartered at Camp Wawanasi, where Mr. Hubbard and Bunny Hartman were already established themselves in the longhouse. Mr. Gordon had tents put up for us, and we found ourselves royally welcomed. From this time on, everyone who had anything to do with or for the troop did it with their whole strength, and a quick but hearty tribute should be paid here. At the beginning, to all those who helped, the long business of issuing equipment was begun this same evening, and progressed day by day throughout almost the whole of our stay at Bear Mountain. Sleep impossible this night due to the quantity and quality of mosquitoes. So that was July 12th. So that was the first day. That was kind of the official start of the U.S. contingent getting together. Now, July 16th, so a couple days later, Forster's on an 8-mile hike over Camp Lemming course of obstacle race, buffaloes, and in parentheses it says plainsmen. So the plainsman patrol was essentially operating as a buffalo patrol. Put up the two big teepees. Pine Tree Patrol of Troop 1, Stamford, Connecticut, under the leadership of Scoutmaster Huntsman and accompanied by Mr. Benny, the Stamford executive, arrived at camp about noon. Later, they demonstrated quick camp marking. Following their lead, each patrol cooked its own supper in the driveway circle. Mr. West spent the night at camp and professed himself most satisfied with the way the troops were shaping up. Further equipment was given out. Now, this is July 17th. Taylor arrived with sewing machine to make needed alterations. Sewed on sleeve insignia. Buffaloes practiced twist and making and cut poles for small teepees. Indian dancing at headquarters. Drill after supper. Mr. Hubbard told us an Indian story at the campfire. And this is a photo of the scouts at Bear Mountain. It's after July 17th because they're all in uniform and they have their contingent patches sewn on the sleeve. July 20th, late breakfast and little to do today. Merit badge sashes issued with high approval. Kirkwood arrived. Victor King's father gave introduction and not work. Mr. Gold's work with the canoeist must not be overlooked. He has been at camp several times already. Plenty of ice cream at noon. Miss Westcott of National Headquarters a guest at camp. Sightseeing tour of the lakes and motorboats after supper by courtesy of Mr. Gordon. 10 scouts and officers received first typhoid inoculation. Campfire with patrol stunts. July 25th. Reveille at 5 a.m. Big day. Cleaned camp. Great hustle while getting ready to go. Left in buses at 9:30 a.m. for New York. Crossed Hudson at Fort Lee. Down Riverside Drive, lickety-split with police escort. To Leviathan. Carried our luggage aboard on our backs. Heat intense. One boy fainted. Friends and relatives arriving. Many photographers on board. New shorts and shoes issued. Free time. Banquet on board in evening. Tendered by United States Lines. Notables included Mr. West, Mortimer Schiff, Colin Livingston, Captain Moore, Mr. Rossbottom, and Will Rogers. Addresses by President Coolidge over special direct wire to the White House. Murphy joined troop tonight. Bed on board. Everybody happy. I think this photo... Oh, yeah. There's a kid over here to the right. You may see him. He's got the camera in his hand. It seems like this youth, and I've got his name in some letters, he took a lot of photos of the contingent while traveling, and he made all those photos available. He would send them to the other contingent members, and they would just ask for whichever ones they wanted. He essentially put out a little booklet or something, because I've got a letter to him where they were asking for photos. And so I think he's responsible for a lot of the photos that were taken during the trip. I just thought it was interesting. You could see him holding his camera there. Also note, they're all holding that flag and waving it. That was very common for World Jamborees, early World Jamborees. They would give flags to the boys to wave them and get some photo shots like that. And I actually have one of those flags that came in this collection. So July 30th. Oh wait, no, this is the farewell dinner. So this was what I was just talking about, and this is just a little menu card that would have been sat at each place setting. So just kind of a neat little piece. And then here's another entry on July 30th. More pictures in afternoon. Indian dancing practice every day. In the evening, 12 scouts danced in full costume for the second-class passengers and afterwards went unannounced to the first-class saloon and danced between other dances. Great hit. Ship furnished sandwiches afterwards in dining room. 561 miles. This is an interesting piece. It's a songbook, not a particularly rare or valuable item, but this is stamped. They actually took some books from just these different books, and they actually stamped them property of Boy Scouts of America International Jamboree Library, because they they needed resources, scouting resources, while they traveled on the ship there and back from to the Jamboree. So I just thought that was neat. Let's see. And here's another nice photo, just of the boys with their hats and everything. August 1st, touched at Cherbourg, something like that, at 9 a.m. Dropped anchor at Cowes at 2 p.m. Showery, customs people very nice, no questions, quickly passed. Tender to Southampton, arriving at 8:10 p.m. Majestic Olympic Berengaria and Mauritia in harbor. Met Colonel Childers and Mr. Vesper on the dock to London. Buses from Waterloo Station to boarding houses arriving at about midnight. So this is getting into, so now they're in England and they're heading to London. So this is getting into the 24 Wembley Jamboree. You can imagine this is essentially the British National Jamboree. It's a little not really that. It's kind of like, I think they called it the Imperial Jamboree. But the thing is that it was not just Britain, but it was also because you got to remember they had the whole Commonwealth and everything. So they had people coming in from other countries, that were part of the British Empire to the 24 Wembley Jamboree. And this was held right before the International Jamboree, and so that's why they stopped there on the way. So and you will find a lot of Wembley Jamboree stuff, in with International Jamboree stuff that the kids picked up there on their way. So August 2nd, buses at 10 a.m. to Wembley. After long wait at gate, admitted and went to stadium where the chief scout was waiting to receive us. The troop made an impressive showing with its flags flying, and we were not ashamed to appear before the chief. He was most kind and spoke cordially to us all. Also met Lord Hampton, Scout Commissioner of England. Dinner at Regent. Back to stadium to see Jamboree exhibit. Cubs, Scotch dancing. After afternoon session and free time, back to exhibit, or back at 5:30. Prince of Wales and Royal Box. Mr. Wessel sat in box and was presented to the Prince. Later supper at Lyons, something like that. Free time in the midway. Home by bus at 10:15 p.m. August 3rd, Sunday. Underground to Wembley for the Great Scout Service at 10:30. 21,500 scouts. Now that's more than were reported when I just Googled it, but this says 21,500, so I don't know if that's what's more accurate. Archbishop of York, BP, and Prince of Wales spoke. Thrilling gathering. Lunch at Service Restaurant. First experience with ginger beer. Afternoon at Wembley paddocks where 13,000 scouts encamped. Fraternizing with many scouts, principally with Scotch. Presented with British Jamboree pennant. Rained hard as usual. Dinner at Slater's. August 4th. Buses to London Tower. Basically, they went all the spots you could imagine going in London. So, London Bridge, St. Paul's, and so on. And so they did touring. And they did that for several days. They spent several days touring kind of the major sites and some of the countryside around England. And so then they get down to August 7th. Buses to King's Cross. Left at 11:30. Luncheon at Peterborough. Beautiful English hedgerows. Boston Stump. So once again, they're just continuing all along, touring the countryside and everything of England, until finally August 8th, and his entry is very short. It's Nidaros and all her passengers but 6 badly at sea all day. Nuff said. So I'm guessing they had a rough crossing over from England getting over to Denmark. So August 9th, they're finally, you think they left on July 12th, or they were getting ready for the Bear Mountain encampment July 12th. So they're finally over in Denmark August 9th. Blessed arrival, Esbjerg, 4 a.m., off at 8 through customs, lunch at main station, introduction to Rudgrud, trains to Copenhagen crossing, 2 ferries, dinner on second ferry, feeding seagulls by hand, official list of patrols posted on train. Broken hearts. So once again, the boys had been evaluated this whole time all the way from July 12th. They'd already submitted what patrols they wanted to be in, which ones they felt they were the experts in. The patrols were not established until August 9th. They're already in Denmark. And that's when they decide, you guys, you boys are going to be, Pine Tree Patrol. You get boys, you're going to be canoeing, and y'all are going to do the aquatic stuff. This is now decided. And apparently it upset some boys that they weren't in one patrol or the other. Arrival in Copenhagen. Tumultuous reception. Band, speeches by Sven Scout and Christian Holm. Long tramp to Warder. Halts and songs along the way. Bicycles, night in the Great Hold with Swedish, Chinese, Siamese, Austrian, and English scouts. And here is just a little kind of the program that would have been handed out. And essentially, the way this jamboree worked, and we'll talk about it, is essentially the first section of the jamboree was all competitions. And so the first kind of week of the jamboree, it was all competitions. The second week of the jamboree was really like tours. They were going out with other groups of scouts from other countries and everything, but they were going out and doing tours. And this is the program for that second week of the touring here on the right. And that's where you'll see on there, they list somewhere in there, American Scouts, and it's 62. I thought it was 65, but it's 62. I don't know where 62 came from. It's right there. I'm not sure where they got that. Maybe it's an error. Maybe it meant to be 52. I don't know. But anyway, so that's kind of the schedule. So the first week was competitions. Second week was touring. This is some, we're getting into a little bit of the memorabilia stuff. I have these. These came in the collection. You may look at that one, especially the one on the left. It sure looks like some untreated silk, and it's crumbling and it's really delicate. But these were all flags that boys brought back from the jamboree. And so, just they wanted, I don't know if they were used by local troops or what, but they were just different flags that were brought back from the jamboree. But the one on the left, especially with how it's kind of crumbling and everything, it really kind of starts the mind, whirling a little bit on remembering that World Jamboree patch, which we will eventually get to. And here is a nice aerial overview of the jamboree. So that kind of gives you at least some of it. So that kind of gives you an aerial overview. Okay, so August 10th. Buses to Helgoland, and please forgive me, I struggle with English words, let alone places in other countries. Where hot baths with help of attendant. Breakfast at Royal Yacht Club. Mr. Wessel and Dr. Cole called on American minister. Taxis to someplace. London. Arriving at 5 minutes before entries close. Assignment to campground. Official opening of Jamboree by Rear Admiral Carstensen. Lunch at Fortuna. Quick camp making at 2:30. This was our first contest activity. Never practiced before. Credible showing, except that one patrol failed to get a fire going. After the long sickness on the Nidaros and the long trip across to Denmark and the fatiguing night in the hold of the Polish transport, everybody slept well on this, the first night in camp. So here's a nice little photo of them there at the camp. I just thought that was pretty neat. There's lots of wonderful original photos in this collection, but I only picked a handful to show. You can tell, though, that this is, one of the things I noticed, and I'll bring it up a little bit later, but notice that the boys are wearing this patch, okay? That might be one there. There's one there. They're wearing the patch. I also want you to notice that it appears that they are wearing a light colored neckerchief. To me, it looks like yellowish, you think the patch is white for white and red for the patch for the Jamboree, but the U.S. patch is white, and so this looks like a yellow. It looks light to me, and that will come up later too. but they are wearing the patch on their uniforms. Okay, so Wood went out for dedication and Rump for twist baking at 9 a.m. So they're all in the competitions. All these days, every day of this week is competitions. All had much appreciated swim and then sat down to watch the swimming events. Don Hawkins thought to have 100-yard swim, but decision given to England. John Hosmer won his heat in life saving, but the instructions were so poorly translated that many different carries were used, and we protested the heat. Tom Fraser did well in surface diving for a dummy. Walked to station, that might be supposed to be station. Walked to station where a memorable reception was placed for BP Grand Review. Flags massed in midfields and dipped to BP as he passed between them. Beautiful effect. Beach branches held aloft as whole scout assembly moved towards BP stand. Special yell led by Macbeth. BP speech. Places resumed. Fearson wins 80-yard dash handsomely in 2 heats, though sick at the time. Later almost collapsed. Dinner at Tuborg. Fearson and Kirkwood sick and taken to Bellevue Hotel at Klampenberg for night. Others taxied back to a wet camp where, however, most of the beds dry during the stadium. I think that's supposed to be stadium. It's just spelled odd. Exercises, heavy rain set in and continued all night. Tug of war team lost to Denmark in the finals in the stadium. Blankets out to dry. Mr. Schiff and McRae in camp. Honors, and I think that they're the only ones who were mentioned over there. And that's why I said I think they're the only members of the troop committee that actually went. Hosmer swam race over this morning. Gill in cross country in afternoon. Baseball in PM to campfire in the evening. Each nation said, I trust you to do a good turn this day in its native tongue. Poles gave Sven Knudsen a token of esteem for his work at the campfires, and he was tossed in a blanket. This is a great photo just of them in Copenhagen. Whole camp marched to the something at 10 a.m. for the review of King Christian X. The king shook hands with Mr. Wessel and Dr. Cole. Rained hard, but the Danes don't seem to mind. Back to camp for lunch in the afternoon to Klampenborg in the pouring rain to the awarding of the prizes by BP. At noon, we read on the camp bulletin board that America had won the competition for the King's Cup, ranking the American delegates the World Scouting Champions. Besides the King's Cup, we were awarded 8 individual prizes for the first aid, canoe race, hiking, patrol, obstacle race, display, best game, baseball, 80-yard dash, and 80-yard dash. Back to camp, very happy. About 6 p.m., everybody taken away by Copenhagenites, except Hubbard, Dixon, Wessel, Birch, Blackman. These stayed in camp since the rain had made it impossible to strike the tents. So then that's all the first week. So that's the end of the first week, August 17th. And we've won the King's Cup and all these individual awards. So then it's the fun sightseeing part of the Jamboree. And basically it just gets into that for the next several days. And they went all over the place. So on August 19th, it says, during this week, the Copenhagen people arranged many trips for their scout guests. Today with Haslov, about 40 scouts went. Others were entertained otherwise by hosts. Saw great dairy and castles of 2 places that I can't pronounce. And it went on. Something really interesting, though, happened on August 23rd. Well, a mention of it happened on August 23rd. Okay. And so, August 23rd, German troop on hand, bright and early, sandwiched in among our scouts and went with us to buses to see the town, Old City Hall, and so on and so on. Later says, on this trip, the first list of distinguished scouts was made up and posted, and the spider was instituted. Arrived 9 a.m. and keeps going on. But so that was and the last line of that says arrived Amsterdam 9:30 p.m. American Hotel. First spider initiation. Okay. So just once again, so they've come up with a list of distinguished scouts among the troop, and they've they're calling it, you know, a spider or something like that, and they had some sort of initiation, you know, whatever that was, who knows. And that's the only mention that I found of the spider in all of the paperwork I went through. So it was kind of like almost like a little club or something, you know. But it was supposed to be some sort of recognition for distinguished scouts. They continue to travel for different days all through Europe. You know, they go through France and just all over the place until finally, on August 30th, they finally boarded the Lancastrian via tender in the evening and started out to sea. So August 30th. So they've been going since they got to national headquarters July 12th. And August 30th, they are finally going back home, starting back home. This is a neat photo, and you know it's on the way back, not on the way there, because you can notice that there is a scout. I'm trying to remember which one here. I actually think that's the scout from Tulsa, Oklahoma, maybe. Looks like it. But anyway, you can see he's got his patch on his uniform. But remember, there were a number of scouts that had the 24 World Jamboree patch on their uniform. And I don't see any other than that one. Now, maybe there's another one tucked away somewhere, but I just don't see them in this photo on the way back home. So they've either been taken off uniforms or they've washed the uniforms and they've gone. I mean, I'm not sure these kids got home with the patch because it may have fallen apart before they got home. I mean, you know, I'm just saying, just keep that in mind that in the little contingent photo there at the camp, they were wearing them, and yet here they are, and they're just not to be seen. So, anyway, this is the welcome home dinner. So this was September 8th. So they left August 30th, and they finally got home September 8th. This was the welcome home dinner. So here are some patch examples. Now, there were some 24 World Jamboree patches in this collection, and none of these were in here. But I did want to show these because these are some wonderful examples of 1924 World Jamboree patches. And I think it's very important that there is something for people to go to and look when they want to see one to know, okay, yeah, that's a real one and that's how it looks. And okay. So let me think for a second. So of these, so these were not in the collection, but that one on the left was one that I had come through my hands and I sold. The one in the middle is another one that I had come through my hands and sell. The one on the right is one that I saw in person, and I didn't take a super close up photo of this, so this is a little zoomed in, but it was in just beautiful condition. As my memory, I think that's the one. I think that's the one that I saw in person, and I asked them if I could use it. That I think so. I think that's that one. But these two in the middle and the left are definitely the ones that I've had come through my hands. As somebody who's had a couple of these, and I don't consider myself an expert, but I've had two of them, and I've had, you know, before, and then what came in this collection, which we'll get into. One thing that when I start looking at these, trying to authenticate them, is I start looking at the lettering, because this is silk. So these are made on untreated silk, and they were essentially, my understanding, a roll, and they were distributed out at the Jamboree. And while they were worn as a patch at the Jamboree, the reason they made them was so that they knew who had paid to be a participant at the Jamboree, because it was essentially your meal ticket. If you didn't have your patch, then you weren't eating, is what I've always heard. And I look at these, and there have been fakes made because it's a valuable item. And personally, I look at the lettering because it's kind of a distinctive font. I look at the coloration. This is supposed to be white. Obviously, they get used. And I look at the type of the font on the numbers because they should all match. The numbers should all be the same font, right? If there's a roll of these patches and they were adding these numbers, one for every scout, as they're making them, they're using the same thing to put those numbers on. So the font should match. Okay, so these are 3 real examples. And they are very fragile, and people have conserved them and done different things to try to stabilize them. But you do not want to handle them any more than you have to, ever. There's some items that you just don't really want to touch once you have it stable where it is in a nice mount or something, and you don't need to touch it again. Now here's 2 beautiful examples. I mean, these are just incredible that somebody was kind enough to let me use for this presentation. The one on the left, which is, just a beautiful example. And then the one on the right, you notice is number 2, and that was King Christian X of Denmark's, his patch. So these are just both just beautiful, absolutely beautiful patches. And so somebody let me borrow images of these too, that they had to put in this presentation. Now these are the patches that came in this collection. 2 of these had been picked up later by the collector who had put it together, and one came from one of the Jamboree members. So they're on the left. Now that's an authentic patch. But remember, these are untreated silk and they fall apart. I hate that it fell apart so bad. I sure wish it was in better shape, like either of the other 2 that I've had. But I mean, it just, this is, I don't think that is that unusual to find them in a condition that, to me, that's maybe a little worse than what I would say is kind of the average condition. But I don't know that it's as bad as you probably think it is, if you haven't really looked at these. So there's Roger Moore's on the left. This one in the middle is a fake. Somebody made that. I don't know who made it. I can't tell you. The letters don't match. The material's wrong. They did a pretty good job, though. I mean, but if you have it next to a real one, just looking at how the lettering is, and it's not right. And once you see it in person, you know it's not right. And they made it where the white is not white. They made it that kind of vanilla, I don't know, dirty tan, whatever you want to call that color. But they made it that color because that's how a lot of them turn with age and everything. But they actually made it as that being the base color of the material, which maybe to an untrained eye maybe makes it look a little better. And I'll say it's a fake. Now, I do not know if these were made later as some sort of reproduction thing or something. That may be, I don't know that. But I just noticed both of these. The second one is a very weird one. The person, I believe they said they got it at the 83 World Jamboree in Canada. And so it's 83 or earlier whenever it was made. But it's on some kind of like a vinyl material. And really odd. Nothing at all like a legitimate issue. The numbers are obviously the wrong font. The letters are the wrong font. The wrong material. I mean, just everything's wrong on it. But I wanted to show these because they were in the collection. And, the one in the middle especially, if it was roughed up a bit, or if it was, someone who didn't really know, that might could trick somebody. Now here I've got some contingent items. Now, to be fair, not all of these are necessarily contingent items, but I want to talk about that a little bit. First, I've got that stick pin up in the upper left. I don't know anything about it other than it just says 1924 Jamboree, Denmark, and it could be a generic trading post item or it could be a contingent item. I don't know. It's probably is a trading post item. Now the one on the left, that is definitely 24 World Jamboree, and we'll talk about the U.S. stuff a little bit more in depth. The item in the middle, that is the button. They didn't have a patch, but the Danish scouts, they had a button that they put on their uniform. Now, the next item is actually for the 24 Wembley, which I just thought was really cool because it's really rare to have any contingent item this early. And so it's the South Australians to the 24 Wembley Jamboree. I just thought that was really neat. And so I put that in there. These other items, I don't know where they're from. They are probably not, I'd almost guarantee you, not made for the Jamboree. But a lot of times in these early Jamborees, the boys going to the Jamboree might not have had anything made specifically from their country for the Jamboree. But boys from the U.S. and other places, they would still trade because they wanted items to represent those other countries, where they might have made friends and they might have swapped some things. You know, they still wanted items. So a lot of things that got traded by the contingents at the Jamboree were not contingent issues like we think of them today, but they might have just been patches off their uniform or patches that they carried with them that were just patches from their country. So I just kind of wanted to show that. Now, this is a great little comparison. I give full credit to this to Jeff Morley. He showed this one time. I don't know how long ago it's been. It's been a while. And I saw it and I was like, saved. Done. Sometimes you see something and you're like, thank goodness. Because I get asked all the time, what's the difference between a 24 and a 20 contingent patch from the U.S.? And I've heard different things like, well, this one was flocked a little heavier and this one was this. All that, I don't need to pay attention to it anymore. This is all I needed to know, and it's great. And he had the 20 shown, and you can see the eye kind of comes back, the almost the brow of the eagle, how it's sculpted, it comes back. And 24, it goes forward. And I looked at the one I had out of this collection for 24, and it went forward. And I was like, it's right. And that was all I needed to know. And so this is just an absolutely fantastic little image representation that Jeff came up with that as soon as he showed it one time, I just had to capture it because it was just so great. So anybody wants to know, there it is. And so they had a patch, and we've seen it on their shirts, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Now, patrol items. Okay. So I have this little boat neckerchief slide. It's like paper. I'm pretty sure it's just a canoeing slide. Okay. Canoeing patrol slide. It's just something they made up. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were other things that were made up by some other boys at the Jamboree. But I just thought it was neat and thought I'd share an image of it. Now, I've shown you in most of the images that we saw, it appears like they're wearing a light colored neckerchief. Okay. And we talked about, the spider, and that was a special recognition item, and that it seemed like it was, only issued to essentially the scouts that distinguished themselves during the Jamboree. So I've got images of 3, okay? So these 2 are in a collection of an advanced collector who's kind of sharing with me. And then I had an image of this one, okay? And this one's a little different. This has red chain stitch, a little bit lighter colored neckerchief, could be washed out. These 2 seem to match a little bit more. I also wanted to talk about, these are labeled as patrol neckerchiefs. It's just from the patrol, like that whole patrol had them. From what I read in that and what I've shared with you, I really believe these were special recognition items. Not everybody didn't have these. I don't know how many boys were recognized. I don't know, if it was 5 or 10 or, if it was more than that, I don't know. But these are certainly just an incredibly rare piece from a World Jamboree. I mean, I can't imagine very many of them were made. They were all, I'm sure they were all essentially made unique. Probably just had somebody, they found a place that could do the embroidery as they traveled and had somebody do it. And I mean, they're just absolutely incredible. The patrols, from all my reading and stuff, I believe Forestry Patrol was represented by the black bear. They used that as their flag and everything like that, but they were the Forestry Patrol. The buffaloes, essentially, were the plainsmen. There was a pine tree, and there is a pine tree patrol emblem, and there was hiker. Now, I'm not sure if hiker had a representation beyond a hiker. I mean, I don't know if they picked another animal or something to be that. I didn't see any mention of it going through. Sometimes they used buffalo and plainsmen kind of interchangeably, as they went through talking about these troops. The canoe, I believe, pretty sure, was the SEAL Patrol, because there is mention several different places about SEAL Patrol. And so I believe that the canoeing patrol, even though it's almost always referred to as canoeing patrol, there are some mentions of the SEAL Patrol. And so I believe they used the seal animal as their patrol emblem. I put Sea Scout there in red because, as far as I saw, there was no mention other than that one letter about a Sea Scout patrol. I believe they consolidated all the aquatics into one patrol, which makes sense to me. So there were 5 patrols at the Jamboree, and there they are. Now we're going to talk some about U.S. contingent medals. Okay. So sometimes it's great when people argued. I had one of these medals up for sale for a while, and people argued with me about this thing all day long. People out of Europe. And that's fine, because it does look kind of a more generic looking medal. Oh my goodness. When I started finding all the paperwork and everything to support these, it was the greatest feeling ever. It was just fantastic to find all the documentation we're talking about these. So, this is a letter to Eagle Scout Thompson. My dear Jamboree Scout, I am sending to your Scout Executive today with this letter the bronze medal for your 26-mile hike in one day, which you won while on shipboard, as your council will doubtlessly want to make a suitable presentation. And he goes on to congratulate him. And that came from John Finley. So, here are 2 examples of a bronze. Now, what I believe is that the local councils, after they got them, some of them, because it was a huge deal. You remember, these boys paid, in today's dollars, $12,000 over that. They were on a ship. Well, they were on this trip from July 12th, whenever they left their home, until they got to New York July 12th. They got back in September. So they were on this trip so this was a huge deal to have a boy go from your area up there. So I believe that some of the local councils, they got the medals in. They weren't engraved. At least I believe the bronzes weren't. The silvers, I'm not sure about. We'll get into those. And I believe some of the councils said, oh, well, we need to engrave this for them. And they had somebody have it engraved. Or maybe the scout had it engraved. But here's an example with no engraving, and here's a sample with an engraving. And it says, Edward H. Leland, this medal, Transatlantic Hike, 1924. Now, there's another medal. And so this is a silver medal. And it says, my dear Jamboree Scout, I am sending to your Scout Executive today with this letter the silver medal for the 100-mile hike and the 26-mile hike in one day, which you, while on shipboard as your council one, it goes on to congratulate him. And this was engraved really beautifully. Beautiful engraving. Presented to Harvey Collins, Troop 48, St. Paul, Minnesota, by Dr. J.H. Finley for 100-mile hike on board, shipped to Jamboree, 1924, and it is hallmarked sterling. So there's a maker mark on all of them, the bronze and the silver. Because of the patina, it can be a little hard, depending on lighting, to tell what's what. but you can see in here that they are home. The silver ones are sterling, and they're hallmarked as such. And somebody was kind enough to. I had the letter, but I didn't have a picture of a silver medal, and so they were kind enough to share with me a picture of the silver medal and the little card for him going to the Jamboree. Here's a talk. There was a long letter that was put out kind of at the end of the Jamboree, and so here it talks about this John H. Finley and about these medals. So I'm going to read that to you. So Dr. John H. Finley, member of the executive board of the National Council and editor of the New York Times, told amusingly his experience in having offered a silver medal to any boy who walked 100 miles during the trip or 26 miles on any one day while on the boat. Only two, and this is referring to the silvers, I believe, only two were worn one on the journey on the Leviathan. So that's a journey over there. So on the way to Denmark, only two medals were won. He was asked if his offer was good for the return journey, and a few days after, the information was wired to the ship that it was. He received a message from the national headquarters saying that 16 silver medals and 46 bronze medals had been won. These medals were especially designed by Dr. Finley for the purpose, and he regretted that owing to the large number won, they could not be made in time to be presented at the dinner. Dr. Finley has also offered a gold medal and 2 silver medals for the best account for the Jamboree trip written by the boys. Now here's a black and white photo of the gold medal that was then later donated in the 70s. It was donated to the National Scouting Museum. So this is awarded to Eagle Scout Albert Snoke as first prize for best essay, Boy Scout Jamboree, 1924. It has 2 hallmarks. I'm assuming one is a gold hallmark because this was the gold medal. And there were 2 silvers that would have been in a similar style. The engraving is not exactly the same, so I'm not, once again, I'm not sure that the bronze and silvers, if those were engraved by the local councils or if they were engraved, maybe the silvers were engraved by national. I'm not sure on that. These I would imagine, because it's only 3, I would imagine all 3 of these were probably engraved when they were issued. And they were all just issued like this. No ribbon or anything. They were just like that. So here's some quantities for you, just to kind of think this through. So bronze hiking award, for hiking 26 miles in a day, 46 were awarded. Silver hiking award, for hiking 100 miles on the trip, 16 were awarded. Gold first place essay, 1 was awarded. Silver, which was for second and third place, 2 were awarded. Now, contingent patch, we're going to estimate, okay? I was saying, how many contingent patches were made? Well, I believe that they were 4 per scout, minimum. And then I'm not sure how many more. And the reason I say that is that they were issued 4 shirts, 4 uniform shirts. And it talks about them all having their patches sewn on their shirt while they were up in New York. So, multiplying that out, I'm guessing that's about 216. Now, what we don't know is we don't know how many were made. Did the leaders get extra shirts? Could the scouts buy extra shirts? It didn't really mention buying extra shirts, but maybe they allowed that, once they got up there. Did the committee members get shirts? Were there extra patches left? So there were probably somewhere between 225 to 300, it would be my guess, somewhere in there, patches made. And there are mint examples known. So we know there were some extras that didn't make it on the shirts. Were any of those offered to the scouts? I never saw anything in the paperwork talking about extra patches. There were some other things talking about some extra paperwork and booklets and things that were sold, but not patches. And contingent medals, which we're about to talk about, were 1 per scout. So 54, maybe 50 for the contingent, and then 4 for the adults, maybe some more for the committee members, and I don't know if there were any extras or not, but around there. The medal's a little wonky. I never knew this information before this. So here's a letter to one of the scouts, actually from Kenosha, Wisconsin, Robert Williams. My dear Scout Williams, it is with great pleasure that we are making available to you, through your Scout Executive, a special medal to commemorate in a permanent way your participation in the 1924 Jamboree as a member of the championship troop representing the Boy Scouts of America. Mr. Wessel made an earnest effort to develop plans whereby the medals might be made available without expense to the Boy Scouts of America. But when it was discovered that this was not practicable, I took great pleasure in making other arrangements so that the medal you will receive comes to you with the compliments of the National Council of the Boy Scouts of America. Just look at the date on this letter. This is not 1924. This is August 6th, 1927. 3 years later. 3 years. These medals weren't issued until 3 years after the Jamboree. What? I saw that and I was just like, huh? I had no idea. And so the medal that came in this collection was actually Hammond Smith, but the letter that was in the collection was this Robert Williams, which is funny. I've got paperwork for one thing and I've got other stuff for another thing. It's all over the place. But I thought that was really cool. Just that, so that was, 3 years later, they issued this World Jamboree medal. Now, this is a cool medal. Absolutely beautiful. So this was issued on behalf of the council to a boy at the that went to the Jamboree. So it says presented to our scout Harold C. Volman Jr., patrol leader, American Jamboree Scout Troop, 1924, by Southwest District. It's supposed to be Chicago Council, but I think the engraver got a little confused. So Southwest District, Chicago Council, Boy Scouts of America, 10 karat gold. So this is a solid 10 karat gold medal that was given out to this scout. It's interesting that there must have been a really big demand for news coverage with this Jamboree, because I believe it's the Chicago Daily Mail was the newspaper, but they actually paid for this scout to go. I believe they paid his whole fee, and I believe they even gave him some spending money while he was over there, and they paid for him to go to the Jamboree. And basically the deal was that he would send them articles to publish along the way so that they could have a running story of the Jamboree that they could put in their paper. And you'll notice the person who was issuing a lot of those medals, even though he was an executive member of the Boy Scouts of America, he worked with the New York Times. And so there was a big interest in these newspapers, in the boys going and trying to get in and getting articles that they could then publish in the paper. But I thought I'm not aware of anything else. I'm sure there could be something, but I'm not aware of anything else like this that was made for, the 1924 World Jamboree. And it's inscribed with the date September 18th, 1924, which would have been shortly after he got back from, he was in New York on the 8th and the 9th and so on. And so he would have been back sometime shortly after, probably by train, and he would have got this then. Now, when the boys kind of got back and they had their welcome home dinner, they, kind of had to square everything away and get their luggage from national headquarters and head back. Well, they're essentially to be discharged from the contingent. Okay. And there was some paperwork, and I actually have a lot of 5 or 6 sheets of the discharge paperwork for a boy that had to fill out to then leave the Jamboree troop once they got back to New York. But when they were discharged, they were given a certificate to recognize that, basically they'd done well and everything and talked about it, and that they were honorably discharged from the contingent. I don't have one of these. There was a photocopy of two or three in the stuff. I guess the men who had these must have been really proud of them, because there was not one of these in the collection. But I thought it was really neat that they had these discharge certificates given to every boy. So briefly, to just talk about some of the competition awards, because I thought these were kind of neat. There on the left is a telegram. I had a number of these Western Union cablegrams and things, and so it says, it's going back from Copenhagen, to Memphis, Tennessee, and it says, "We won Jamboree, tell all." So they were pretty enthusiastic. And there's BP giving. It looks like it would be the biggest award. It's actually not the biggest award, which is odd. That's not the King's Cup, but there's BP handing out an award to the U.S. contingent. So it says what Americans won. And so World Championship for the highest all-around score, 181 points. Prize, the King's Cup. Obstacle race, canoeing, baseball, best demonstration of national game, 24-hour hike. The prize was the silver plaque offered by the BT paper of Copenhagen. So that hike plaque was that big thing that BP was handing out. I mean, it looks more impressive than the King's Cup, but it was just for this 24-hour hike. And so then it goes on to say, Danish vase offered by the Rotary Club, first aid, prize, silver tray, 80 meters race, prize, Thornwalston works. It kind of recognizes who donated some of these prizes. It says the last two were individual prizes. It was also announced that W.C. Wessel, Scoutmaster of the American Troop, and Dr. George J. Fisher, Deputy Chief Executive, Boy Scouts America, which I never saw any mention of him there, so I don't know. Maybe he was there, but I didn't see it talked about. But it says would receive medals for their leadership. I have no idea what those are supposed to look like. I don't know what, I'm pretty sure, this was a bulletin put out by Boy Scouts of America on the activities that were going on. And so I think this is just saying, because Fisher was so active with the contingent, kind of probably planning and everything, that he would get one of these medals. But I don't know. I don't know what these medals were, or if they were even actually ever handed out. It might just be saying that they were going to hand them out, and they might not have ever made one. I don't know. I've never seen them. But they could exist. And then it talks about troop presented to the king. It was the thrill of a lifetime to be called for the flags of 37 nations by Sir Robert Baden-Powell to receive the King's Cup. And it goes on and on. This is two different photos. And I've got some other photos, but here's two of the photos. And these kind of show the different prizes. And like I said, the hiking one looks like it's that's the one that looks so impressive. Even though the silk padding is kind of falling apart with age. But so, on the left, you have the Silver King's Cup for World Championship, and then a Silver Cup for Patrol Obstacle Race, Silver Vase for canoeing, Silver Shield for hiking, Porcelain Vase for National Display, Silver Cup for National Games, Silver Cup for baseball, small silver tray for first aid. And that's the article that was in the kind of released by National. And then the photo on the right is from a reunion. And all of these items were donated to the National Scouting Museum back in the 70s. I'm not sure who had them back then. I don't know if it was Wessel or I don't know. I don't know who it was. So I thought it was really neat because the boys who were in this contingent, they really stuck around and talked to each other and knew each other for years. You've got here, it talks about, I have a whole stack of these kind of autographs. Essentially everybody on the contingent and some other people, he had them all autographed. And so you can see, William C. Wessel there and just, a bunch of other ones. and I thought this was neat. It was a William C. Wessel business card when he was director of camping. But the people they met on this, they stayed in touch for a long, long time. I mean, and they would send each other. I mean, I found Christmas cards from each other and letters, and they had reunions. They had like a 1 year reunion, and they kept going, and they eventually had a 50-year reunion. And so I just thought it was really neat. On the left is a Christmas card that was sent out by Mr. and Mrs. West, and on the left, and then on the right is a Christmas card from William C. West. So I have a couple other that he sent out, but they would just they really stayed in touch, and there's even like a newsletter they would send out. Saying it's a newsletter's a little more than what it was, but it had like just notes on so and so's getting married, and oh, I'm sending so and so a gift for their birthday, and and oh, so and so's moved to wherever, and they actually kept in touch with each other for decades. And at the 50th reunion, I counted, and I think, so that was in 1974. I think there were 25 or 26 men participants. So they were, people who were on the contingent. A lot of them had their wives with them all at the reunion. But essentially, about half of them were still around in 1974 and got together for the reunion. And that's it.